Babel by R.F. Kuang. Which seems right to you? Do we try our hardest as translators to render ourselves invisible? Or do we remind our reader that what they are reading was not written in their native language? That's an impossible question, said Victoire. Either you situate the text in its time and place, or you bring it to where you are, here and now. You're always giving something up. Is faithful translation impossible then? Professor Playfair challenged. I suppose not, Victoire said reluctantly. But what is the opposite of fidelity? Asked Professor Playfair. Betrayal. Translation means doing violence upon the original, means wrapping and distorting it for foreign unintended eyes. So then, where does this leave us? How can we conclude, except by acknowledging that an act of translation is then necessarily always an act of betrayal? Babel by R.F. Kuang is claimed to be a historical fantasy epic. However, the world in which the story takes place is not much unlike our own, the one that we live in today. After all, it takes place in Britain, in London, in Oxford. Magpie Lane is a real place. The characters talk like we talk today. There's essentially no world building, so is it truly an epic? Is it truly a high fantasy? I think it reads more as a low fantasy historical fiction. It's also told in an academic setting, so it's considered dark academia. Babel is primarily told in third person limited. When I read long books, I fully expect them to be worth every page. This book was not. It was moderately worth my time, leading towards a waste of time because the book's payoff is not grand in the slightest. It isn't shocking, it isn't surprising, it isn't emotional. The ending is so underwhelming, and the journey to get there, so flat. As I came to the ending of this novel, my thoughts were, I'm finally gonna finish, rather than, I'm sad this book is coming to an end. And when the book ends, there is zero emotional impact because the author lacked in all these pages to make me love and care for our main character, Robin. Though I have to say, I am happy that I read it because as a writer, I definitely learned a lesson or two. If I could use only one word to describe this novel, the word would be yes, flat. It's the only word that currently comes to mind, but although flat, is the book boring? Not per se. I think what kept me from being bored were my expectations. I was always waiting for the big, exciting thing to happen. I was being patient. I kept saying, it's going to happen now. No, now. No, now. But now it never came. The book never got exciting, which is so disappointing because the book claims to be about exciting things, revolution and whatnot. That's actually what disappoints me the most. This book could have been so exciting, could have been action-packed. In fact, that's what the text led me to think. Not even the synopsis, but the text itself. It said, no, it promised excitement. It screamed at me, just wait. Soon the pace will quicken and you will be taken on this big adventure with twists and turns and drama. It promised time and time again, but fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I should have just put the book down. And for that, I have to say that I cannot recommend this book to everyone. I'd only recommend it to people who are looking for this sort of storytelling, which is to say, intelligent, knowledge-packed, slow-paced, unexciting, and flat. Originally, I thought this book was going to be about how translation is an act of betrayal. I thought that the act of an intentional bad translation was going to be the cause of the climax, or perhaps the journey to the climax. After all, on the book, in bold, it reads, an act of translation is an act of betrayal. That one powerful statement alone sets up so much and the book falls incredibly short. However, it also states Babel is about student revolutions, colonial resistance, and the use of language and translation as the dominating tool of the British Empire. While also asking, can powerful institutions be changed from within? Or does revolution always require violence? Yes, there is a student revolution. Yes, there's exploration of colonialism and colonial resistance. Yes, language and translation are what give the empire lots of power. And yes, our main characters have to decide whether violence is required to create change. But on the most basic level, the book isn't really about any of those things. It's mostly about the dangers of being dependent, about what happens when one depends solely on one place, person, thing, or group. Take example from this passage. Silver afforded London all of its modern conveniences. Silver powered the ice-making machines in the kitchens of London's rich. Silver powered the engines of the breweries which supplied London's pubs. in the mills which produce London's flour. Without silver, the locomotives would cease to run. No new railways could be built. The water would run foul, the air would thicken with grime. When all the machines that mechanize the processes of spinning, weaving, carding, and roving ground to a halt, Britain's textile industry would wholly collapse. The entire country faced possible starvation, where there was silver in the plow frames, seed drills, threshing machines, and the drainage pipes throughout Britain's countryside. "It's very embarrassing," Victoria observed one afternoon over tea. "How much it all depends on Oxford in the end. You'd think they would have known better than to put all of their eggs in one basket." The book follows Robin Swift, who, at 11, is brought from his home in Canton, China, to London by a Professor Lovell. Lovell trains him in Latin, Greek, and Chinese so he can later attend a translation school, aka Babel. Once Robin gets to Babel, he meets his cohort, Remy, Victoire, and Letty, and he falls in love. Well, they all fall in love. After all, apart from Letty, they're all foreigners, they're minorities, having to deal with the racism and the women, the patriarchal and misogynistic society. Suffice to say, they relate to one another and find solace in each other's company. One day, Robin comes across some thieves, and he has an instinct and acts on it to help them. This eventually earns him a spot in the Hermes Society, a society that works against Babel's goals in essentially stealing silver from poor countries. Eventually, Remy, Victoire, and Letty find their way in the society, but just when everything seems to look up, the world turns upside down and it leaves Robin with some tough choices to make. It's sad that I have to say this, but I didn't care all that much for the characters. Even when the most emotional things happen, the impact isn't impactful, for Kuang failed to show us earlier on in the novel what was happening in the minds of the characters. So when those bad things did happen, I didn't actually feel bad for the characters. Or when one of the characters admits to something super emotional, it kind of felt like it was coming out of left field. This even counts for the sad ending that this book has. I didn't find myself wanting to cry. I didn't care. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's it. The book was a disappointment, and not because of the hype from its fans, but because of the book setting itself up so nicely and not capitalizing or delivering on its fantastic start. The novel said we're going places, but only went down the road, taking 5 hours instead of 20 minutes. Now, let's talk about rereadability. This book is the type of book that you can reread. Firstly, there's a lot to learn here, a lot of interesting facts, so that would be reason alone. Maybe you'd want to reread to enjoy the flow of the story without all the footnotes, or you can just reread it to enjoy the slow pace. Toward the beginning, I thought this was going to be a story I would reread, but upon completing it, I don't think I will. Again, the payoff is just too low. And now the reviews. Are they accurate? I have to say yes. And they basically come in two categories. The "this is good" and the "this is good, but." Every review compliments Kuang on her incredible research and how she applied it, along with her incredible knowledge, and made it into a novel. I cannot agree more. I love languages myself, so I found all the etymology talk fascinating. And even if you don't, there's no denying that the information is well done, period. Though, you might agree with one review that said because there was so much information, it felt as if Kuang is trying to unnecessarily prove her intelligence to the world. The main consistent negative review was that Kuang didn't give her readers enough emotional time with the characters. She often told, more often than showed, what characters were feeling, which was simply not enough for big impact when we got to the scenes that were supposed to be emotional. Before we get on to the discussion, let me inform you of the triggers. Unsurprisingly, there's some racism here and a few uses of racial slurs, and there's one scene with domestic violence. This book has many discussion points, but the one I found most interesting and perhaps younger than all the other discussions has to do with language. What do you have to be? Who do you have to be? What do you have to give in order to speak a foreign language, in order to use a foreign language, or even to speak a different dialect or use a different dialect? Take this passage where Robin and Professor Lovell speak of this. It's just that, well, it only seems fair there ought to be some kind of exchange, Robin said. We take their languages, their ways of seeing and describing the world. We ought to give them something in return. But language, said Professor Lovell, is not like a commercial good, like tea or silks to be bought and paid for. Language is an infinite resource, and if we learn it, if we use it, who are we stealing from? Thank you so much for watching this review of Babel by R.F. Kuang. If you liked it, let me know by leaving a thumbs up and leaving a comment. Subscribe for more reviews like this. Let me know if you've read Babel and what were your thoughts upon reading it, or if you haven't, whether you're planning to read it now or not. If you are yet to watch my Babel reading vlog, that'll be linked in the description. Till next time, bye.